Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manicherian, former NFL scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined as always by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. Aaron, we're recording on a Wednesday, and the big news today is that Justin Herbert is staying in school at Oregon. What did you make of that decision?
Well, it's interesting because on a development level, I think it's always best to come into the NFL as young as possible, but on a player projection level, right, our player projections like players who have as many college starts as possible. So, I think when you look at Herbert, his stats absolutely went down this year. So the idea that maybe he wants another year to play college and build his resume makes some sense. But it sounds like this is much more of a personal thing for him, that he wants to play with his brother, who's going to be a freshman tight end next year, rather than anything having to do with where he might be drafted or improving his draft position.
Yeah, if you go back 10 years ago when it was kind of the norm for people to stay in school, this certainly wouldn't have raised as many eyebrows. And I think if you kind of look at it, sometimes the needs that the player, the family situation maybe the guy comes from, can help dictate these things sometimes a little bit more than we sometimes give it credit to. Not all of these things happen in a vacuum, and if you come from one family situation versus another, it might make different sense to you in that case. What I'm looking at is the quarterback class getting very, very thin. You brought up the age thing. I think it's interesting looking at Baker Mayfield obviously playing really well this year, and Sam Darnold starting to have a few good starts here towards the end of the year since he's come back from that injury. He's much younger than Mayfield, but Mayfield had all of the starting experience that you could ever ask for as a college player. I don't know where we start to look now, because I think most people were looking at Herbert as kind of the top quarterback that they had circled on the big board. Not a lot of big names up there. You had the Duke kid that was up there, Daniel Jones for a little bit. But there's really not anybody that you're screaming right and home about, and you can see why last year. I think we were talking about all these guys in such glowing terms because there's a lot of talent there that you just don't see every year.
Yeah, everything says this is not a really good draft class. And so, I haven't run any kind of projections from us on this draft class, but nobody's talking about them as anybody trying to trade up for any of the quarterbacks that are coming out right now.
Right. And then people traded up for Trubisky, but not Mahomes or Watson. So who knows? All right. The other big thing this week, I'm here in Pennsylvania. As you know, if the Eagles somehow find a way into the playoffs, we're going to have Mike Tanier back on to break them down heading into the wild card weekend. Is there a controversy? I know last week we said, no, this isn't for real. Neither of us was really going to buy it too hard. Are you starting to cave a little bit in the direction of maybe Nick Foles is the answer?
No, I still think Wentz is the better player. I know that by DVOA, Wentz was the better player this year than Foles has been. Part of it is Foles has played a relatively easy schedule in the games that he has played, as opposed to Wentz playing an average schedule in the games that he played. So that makes Wentz look a little bit better than he actually is. I know that sounds weird, given the teams that they've played against, but the Rams are not a great defense this year. If you look at DVOA versus VOA, when we add in the opponent adjustments, Foles drops. So, Houston, for example, is not a great pass defense. They're a great run defense. I still think Wentz is the better player, and I don't think that you throw him over the side for Foles.
So I'm with you. My opinion at the end of the day hasn't changed. I think Wentz is the guy there. I think he's got just talent that Foles doesn't have. And I'm with you. I think that it would be kind of silly to look at it in other ways. And the other thing that is that Wentz is cheaper than Foles going into the future next year. You'd have to pay Foles a bunch of money. You still got Wentz on that rookie contract. Now, in a couple of years, that will change. But
Foles is a free agent next year, right?
He's a free agent, yep.
He's going to get a starting job somewhere.
He will. And that's where I wanted to kind of play the devil's advocate, because the Foles fans will tell you the Eagles play better with Foles. Forget about not having all of the high upside stuff. He gets it done. The proof is in the pudding. Even going back, they'll tell you about when Chip Kelly was around with Nick Foles, how Nick Foles played, and that it's not just a coincidence what's going on. My argument is always, if you ran the same offense with Carson Wentz that you were running with Foles, I think you'd have that much success and more. Wentz has all the mobility that Foles has. If you were to simplify things the way they simplify things when Foles is in there, I think you would see a lot more success out of Wentz than even you see when they're playing with Foles right now. The argument against it is Wentz takes the hits. Wentz is trying to extend plays. That's a lot of what makes him better. And this is a guy that's been injured in high school, college, and the pros. And at a certain point, availability is your greatest ability. It is what you got. And what if you traded Wentz? If you look at it from the Eagles' point of view, you could certainly get a lot in return there. And then maybe you're looking at building a more sustainable team with Foles at the helm.
I think with Foles, it's that we forget the long term, right? We remember these 2 games, right? He's played so well in the last 2 weeks, especially against Houston. We forget that he was not good in the first 2 weeks, right? He played the first 2 weeks of the season. He was terrible against Atlanta.
Bad.
Right? Which, even though they still had a couple of guys who would later get injured, that Atlanta defense was not good when he played them. I mean, they were worse since. But and the last year, he went on the great run in the playoffs, but we all forget how badly he played in his 3 starts during the regular season. It was terrible.
Yep. I think that at the end of the day, it's probably a lot like Fitzmagic. There's been a little, Saint Nick Foles going on. I told the Eagles fans, if they win the Super Bowl with Foles, then you're happy. Then if they don't, which I don't think they will, then I think that you guys can move on from this and kind of get back to reality with Carson Wentz, who is maybe going to be, an all-pro level quarterback based on how he's played in his short career so far.
Yeah, and honestly, it's very different from last year. There's a big difference between getting in as the 6th seed and having to win 3 road games and getting in as the 1st seed and having to win 2 home games.
But yeah, if Foles does that, throw him in the Hall of Fame. He's Eli Manning at that point, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look and let's go around the league to the big games that we broke down last week. The first one that we look at, and I was dead wrong on this one, was the Chargers losing to the Lamar Jackson-led Ravens.
Yes, although, again, not really the Lamar Jackson-led Ravens as much as the Jimmy Smith and Bobby Humphrey and Terrell Suggs-led Ravens. This was one of 8 games this year with the single-game defensive DVOA below minus 50%, but it also had negative offensive DVOA. The Ravens have had 0 or negative offensive DVOA in 5 of the 6 games with Jackson as the quarterback. They are doing this with defense. The defense has been absolutely phenomenal over the last month and a half, and the same goes for this game. This defense was fantastic, keeping the Chargers below 4 yards a play.
Yeah, and then meanwhile, the Chargers, who had been playing so well heading into this game, all of a sudden they take that loss, and they would have had the chance to claim the lead spot in the division and have a chance at that bye. But it looks like they're going to finish behind the Chiefs most likely as a result. I was disappointed there by that game from them, but, better to happen now than in January for them. I was disappointed. I really was. I thought that they would do a little bit more, but the Ravens really just physically, they beat them up.
Yep, it was defensive dominance, absolute defensive dominance.
All right, next game that we talked about was Washington at Tennessee, a game that was as boring as it sounds.
Yes. This game happened.
This game happened. We'll talk about Tennessee and Indianapolis, of course, later. I don't have much to add here. Do you?
I think the only thing I have to add is I'm surprised at how reasonable Josh Johnson looks.
Yeah, that's fair. It's pretty interesting. I mean, when we talk about these quarterbacks and how Nick Foles can go from St. Louis Nick Foles to Eagles Nick Foles, and Jared Goff can go from St. Louis Jared Goff to Los Angeles Jared Goff. It's kind of a
year to his second year. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just kind of amazing when you see that. And then Josh Johnson there on the street, and somehow Mark Sanchez had a job. It really makes you wonder how many quarterbacks there are that could play in the NFL that just never got an opportunity, and not mentioning any names, or how many quarterbacks, vice versa. How many guys are just there because they were drafted high or they were drafted at all, and so they've got a job in the league for years, and I don't understand why that's really happening. So
yeah, Johnson has bounced to so many teams, and he does look like a competent backup level quarterback who should have a job in the league. But I'm going to say the name that is unsaid. Johnson's skill set is essentially the poor man's Colin Kaepernick, right? So all of the excuses that were used for why teams didn't sign Kaepernick, like they'd have to redesign their offensive scheme for him, that kind of thing, or his performance level wasn't good in his last couple years in the league, right? In all of those things, he's either similar to or better than Josh Johnson. So if Josh Johnson could look like this, could Kaepernick have saved Washington's playoff chances?
Ooh, we'll have to leave it up to the listeners to decide on that one. You bring up a really interesting point. Let's take a look around and let's say the second most important game for the Super Bowl last week was the Chiefs at the Seahawks. The Chiefs at the Seahawks, obviously, that was the battle of the Chiefs' high-flying offense against the Seahawks and their running game, and the Seahawks were able to come away with that one and stifle the Chiefs. Do we have anything to be concerned about in Kansas City?
Again, my system loves the Chiefs this year, and it even liked them in this game. Kansas City actually outgained Seattle per play, 7.0 to 6.2 yards per play. They had a major special teams advantage, 19% special teams DVOA compared to minus 14% for Seattle. There were 4 fumbles in this game, and Seattle recovered 3 of them. The only one that Kansas City recovered came on a kick return. So my numbers say that the teams basically played even. And Seattle, got the win because their timing was right on a few plays, and they had the fumble recoveries. My numbers still like Kansas City. On the other hand, you do have to ask yourself, my God, how much does Mahomes have to outscore the other quarterback to win a freaking game on the road? Because this defense can't stop anybody.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. 2018, the year of the offense, and we've been looking at teams like the Chiefs, the Saints, the Rams, the favorites throughout the year. These are the teams that are outscoring everybody. They're changing the way that you have to play football. All of a sudden, December comes, and we start to see the teams that are running a little bit more, that have built their team on defense, like the Seahawks, like we talked about
the Bears,
the Bears. We talked about the Ravens. These teams all of a sudden are the ones that everybody's saying, oh, you don't want to play them right now. This is a scary team. If you have to face them in the playoffs, you don't want that team. So I think this game in a lot of ways was a preview of what we can expect there, with one key difference, and that is in this case, the defensive team was the home team. And more often than not in the playoffs, we're going to see those high-flying offenses playing at home. And I really think that when those matchups come to pass, I'm looking forward to January is what I'm trying to say. I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see. It was fascinating this night to see the Chiefs in Seattle in just a regular season game with the stakes being what they were. Put that in the playoffs. Now you're going to flip it on its head so that the Saints are going to have their climate-controlled environment. The Rams are going to be in L.A. most of the time. How is it going to look when it's flipped on its head there? Will it be teams trying to play keep up? Will it be able to be played more on the Lamar Jackson 6 possessions a game type scenario? And what's going to win in January in the modern NFL?
I mean, the Chiefs did play the Ravens, and they played them at home, and they won in overtime, and it was very close. So, that high-powered offense versus the high-powered defense, offense won in the regular season, but only slightly. The other thing I'll say is that for those spectacular offensive teams, for most of them, the defense has improved in recent weeks, right? The Saints have had a phenomenal defense for the last few weeks. The Chargers have had a pretty good defense. Even the Rams' defense has improved a little bit. The Chiefs is the one defense that hasn't improved.
And looking ahead, like you just talked about, the Saints hosted the Steelers, won that game. They will be hosting the entire playoff run. I think it's going to be really difficult. If you were going to say the Saints playing at anybody in the playoffs, I probably wouldn't like the chances very much. But with everybody having to go through the Superdome, I absolutely love the Saints' chances of coming out of the NFC. And the Steelers, on the other hand, no longer control their destiny. Maybe they can sneak into the playoffs this week, but a really tough loss for them and an inconsistent season.
Yeah, it's tough. The Steelers have declined a lot in the last few weeks since that colossal win over Carolina. I'll say this about the Saints, and I say this a lot, that historically the Saints don't have a bigger home field advantage than any other team. I know that sounds remarkable, but they don't historically over the course of multiple years. They don't have a particularly large home field advantage. That being said, being the number one seed is a lot of advantage on its own. You don't have to have a special advantage in the Superdome to be to have the advantages that come with being the number one seed. And the Saints get that. So it doesn't matter whether they have a special home field advantage. Just having the regular home field advantage is enough to make them the favorites now. And we now have them as the Super Bowl favorites. And in weighted DVOA, which gives more weight to recent games, we have them neck and neck with Kansas City at the top of the league.
Yeah, they've got to be the favorites, I think, no matter how you look at it right now. But it seems like it's gotten a lot closer lately. Their offense really hasn't been playing well, even though the defense, like you said, has really stepped it up. The Bears are super interesting. The Rams are super interesting. And in the AFC, it's really looking like it could be anybody's game also over there. So,
I realize people are talking about how much they like defense, but come on, a Kansas City-New Orleans track meet in the Dome at Atlanta would be awesome.
Oh, that would be a lot of fun. They'd have to open Chick-fil-A for that, right?
Even on a Sunday.
All right, moving right ahead, let's talk about the big games in Week 17. There is no doubt about what the biggest game of this week is.
Win and you're in, baby. Indianapolis at Tennessee, probably with Blaine Gabbert at quarterback, which gives them less of a chance to win, but not zero chance to win.
So, right, I just saw the Wednesday practice report came out. It looked like Mariota didn't practice.
Yeah, but it may be an issue of you either get Gabbert or you get Mariota at less than 100%, which is that really much better than Gabbert if you have Mariota at 75%? I mean, if he can't.
Unfortunately, no, and that's probably an indictment on Mariota, right?
Right. But if he can't fully feel his hand, the throws are not going to get there.
Right.
I will say the first game between these teams, first of all, Indianapolis destroyed Tennessee 38-10. And second of all, that game also had half a game from Mariota and half a game from Gabbert.
Half a game Mariota and half a game Gabbert. That does not sound like a plan for victory. Although Tennessee playing at home, that certainly bodes more well in their favor. And the big reason of that would be Andrew Luck and T.Y. Hilton and their home road splits. So obviously Indianapolis plays in a dome, and at home, Luck has an IQR of 116, whereas on the road he's down at 86. So goes from the fourth highest in the NFL all the way down the list. T.Y. Hilton, similar trends, a 78 receiver rating on the road, 131 at home. Meanwhile, he's been boom or bust for them. When T.Y.'s been over 75 receiving yards, the Colts are 7-2. When he's under 75 receiving yards or does not play, Colts are 2-4. So since his return in Week 7, the Colts had rattled off 8 wins in 9 games, the lone blemish being when they were shut out against the Jaguars. But besides that, they've been playing really well. Unfortunately, they will have to go on a road in this one. And really, when I look at this matchup, that's the only thing that I see where I think, man, that's looking good for the Titans.
Even from Tennessee, like looking at Indianapolis weaknesses going into this game, like I found, for example, Indianapolis is 26th in the league covering tight ends. They allow 78 yards a game once you adjust for who are the tight ends they're playing, and that's the highest in the NFL. But Tennessee's starting tight end is essentially a blocker, Luke Stalker. Like, how much are they going to get out of Michael Pruitt? And this kid Ferkser has a great DVOA, but it's only on 19 passes. He's not like a huge weapon. And generally, right, Tennessee wants to run. They want to run a run-focused offense, lots of Derrick Henry. Well, Indianapolis's defense is 5th against the run, 19th against the pass.
Yeah, you've seen a defense that's been really physical, that's played really well throughout the year. They got the stud rookie linebacker, and they play a lot of zone, which means they're going to spend a lot of time facing the quarterback, seeing what's happening in front of them, and being, in better fits for the run game to stop things there. So they're going to load up the box, and they're going to try to force whoever the quarterback is to beat them. And I would be surprised if that quarterback could come through with it, whether it's Mariota or Gabbert.
One thing I will say is that if whoever's the quarterback is looking to dump things off, if Andrew Luck is looking to dump things off, right, he has 76 passes to Nyheim Hines this year, but Tennessee is outstanding against running backs in the passing game. They're number 2 in DVOA. I believe they only allowed Hines to have 1 catch in the first game between these two.
Looking at on the other side of the ball, also, my one little fun fact is the total points leaderboard rushing. Derrick Henry has rocketed up the list. He has 30 total points rushing this year, which places him 3rd in the league behind Saquon Barkley and Melvin Gordon. Now, that's only on rushing plays, not counting receiving. 7.2 of those 30 points added came on his monster 238-yard, 4-touchdown game against Jacksonville. He had another 5.7 points added against the Giants before having a 0-point game last week. Still, those 12.9 over the last 3 weeks have pushed him way up the list into the top 3, up ahead of Ezekiel Elliott and Todd Gurley. So watch out for him. Watch out for Dion Lewis, who's always a broken tackle fiend. Those guys in the backfield, they've been as good as anybody this year.
Tennessee leads the league with 14.6% broken tackle rate on offense. I will point out the Indianapolis defense is middle of the pack, which 10.7%.
Moving around the AFC, we'll take a trip up north in the AFC to Cleveland at Baltimore. That is the second most important game. What are the stakes there, Aaron?
Well, obviously Baltimore is in with a win, but Cleveland has been playing very well. They are the number 4 team in DVOA if we only look at the last 6 weeks, and they actually won the first game between these two teams way back in week 5, one of the rare wins under Hugh Jackson, 12-9 in overtime. It was interesting. Collins and Allen were still the running backs for Baltimore, and Baltimore had only 20 carries from running backs. So Baltimore was running a very different offensive style back when Cleveland beat them back in week 5.
Yeah, and the styles really changed since Jackson took over. And there was a huge win last week that we talked about already. One thing that's interesting with Lamar Jackson, you alluded to this earlier, they haven't really moved the ball on offense with him in there. And specifically, they haven't moved it passing the ball. His total points passing for each game, we took a look at that, and he had negative 6.3 last game as a passer. And what stood out even more than that is that his best game was just 0.01 total points earned passing, which was against the Bucs. So we looked at every team's quarterbacks over the time since he became a starter, and he's the only starter besides Josh Rosen to not have a single game with 1 or more total points earned passing. So he's not helping them create points earned in the passing game. Even in the running, it's been a lot of volume. It hasn't been a lot of the scrambles, which is where we see a lot of the expected points added coming from quarterback runs. It's been a lot of the designed run stuff, and it's been a lot of kind of keeping on schedule type runs, not a lot of really point-gaining stuff, mostly just clock eating. But even though he hasn't created offense, he's helped them play the game on their terms, and they've been wanting to win on defense and special teams, and it's worked. When they allow 20 or more points, they're 1-5. When they allow 19 or less, they're 8-1. So the formula's been simple for them. They're trying to limit the amount of possessions that are going to happen in a game. I think they could be up against a tough opponent this week in Cleveland. Baker Mayfield's been outstanding under Freddie Kitchens. I know everybody wants to talk about him staring at Hugh Jackson, but what he's done as a football player this year has been really impressive to me. I think, he's looking for sure like a franchise quarterback. And crazy thing about this game, if you really think back to the draft, that we'd be seeing the Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson Bowl in Week 17 with Lamar Jackson playing for the playoff spot. And Baker Mayfield kind of looking like the savior for Cleveland. Really interesting year as it's played out, kind of just thinking back over the last 17 weeks.
I will say one thing that makes this a good matchup for Baltimore is the way the Cleveland defense is structured, because they're 6th against the pass, but 21st against the run. They allow a 12.2% broken tackle rate, which is fourth highest in the league on defense. They actually lead the league with 147 broken tackles because they faced the most plays on defense of any team, but it only works out to 4th in broken tackle rate. And so you're going to run on them. You want to avoid – they've played really well in the secondary. It's surprising. They're only 29th in pressure rate despite having Larry Ogunjobi and Myles Garrett. But they've played really phenomenal in the secondary. Denzel Ward is 6 yards per pass allowed, which is 11th. 63% success rate, which is 3rd. Nickelback TJ Carey also has really good numbers. So this is the kind of team that you want to keep it on the ground against, and that works right into what Baltimore wants to do.
Right. The game script is simple for them. They're going to want to keep it on the ground, and it'll be really fascinating to watch Baker Mayfield go up against that tough Baltimore secondary. All right. What is the third most important game of the week that we'll be talking about? I think there are a few candidates in the NFC.
Yeah, I mean, we went here with the game where the team that won was in without needing any help, right? There's 3 games this week where the team that wins is in without needing help. We've covered 2 of them. The third is Chicago at Minnesota. Chicago is trying to get the second seed. They would need the Rams to lose to Arizona. But
So they have
Minnesota,
to try. That's a big game for them.
they do have to try. Minnesota is in with a win. They would get the 6th seed, I believe, with a win. Unless Seattle, I think if Seattle loses and Minnesota wins, they get the 5th. But either way, it's a wild card. The Bears won the first game between these teams, 25-20 in Chicago. It was a game that really accentuated the Vikings' problems running the ball this year. They're 30th in DVOA. They only had 13 carries for 17 yards by running backs in that first game. But the Diggs had 126 yards receiving with a touchdown. Thielen had 7 for 66. Trubisky had only 165 yards passing for the Bears in that game. They won it with running and defense.
Yes, this will be a totally different game in terms of when the Vikings have the ball. Like you mentioned, in the previous matchup, Vikings ran the ball 14 times, including once by Cousins. He targeted Diggs 18 times and Thielen 12 times. So they were trying to throw the ball to their wide receivers, just like we saw that Vikings offense over the first part of the year. And it's a bad strategy against the Bears because their quarterback rating against when targeting each position. So you target a wide receiver against the Bears, you'll get a 72 quarterback rating, the worst in the league. Tight ends, you'll get a 77 quarterback rating, which will make you the 5th worst in the league. And running backs, you'll get a 93 quarterback rating, which will make you the 8th worst in the league. So they've been good against no matter who you target against them. We are talking about the best defense in the NFL here, but it's been especially hard to target wide receivers against the Bears defense, and that was clearly all the Vikings were trying to do. This game they have to go against the strength of the Bears, even if there's not maybe a lot of weaknesses to go after with them. They've got to stop attacking the strengths and find another way to attack. It's got to be Dalvin Cook and Latavius Murray finding a way. And the good news is that's their MO on offense these days.
Yeah, but even though it's their MO on offense, they only have minus 4% DVOA in the last 3 games running the ball. So even when they've been more dedicated to the run and they've been better running the ball, they haven't been particularly good at it. I would think actually you can go after, when you pass to wide receivers, you can go after Amukamara. I'm kind of shocked that despite the great defense overall for the Bears, Amukamara has lousy charting numbers. He comes out 54th in yards per pass, 70th in success rate. The other 2 corners come about around 20th in yards per pass and 40th in success rate. Obviously, what's a huge big deal for Chicago is not the secondary as much as it is the pressure. They're 3rd in the league in pressure rate on defense, and Minnesota is 23rd in pressure rate on offense. So there is going to be a lot of pressure on Mr. Kirk Cousins in this game.
Yep, scary proposition to pass the ball if you're the Vikings against that defensive front. Now, one thing not to sleep on is that the Vikings don't have a horrible defense on their own. The Bears lead the NFL in points saved on defense. They're number 1 in the NFL. The Vikings are up at number 3. Now, but here's the thing. If they're going to try to beat the Bears by playing defense better than them, that might be tough because the difference between the Bears at number 1 and the Vikings at number 3 in points saved is the same as the difference between the number 10 team, the Giants, and the number 31 team, the Falcons. So, yes, the Vikings are up there at 3rd, and they might want to try to slow the game down and try to kind of beat the Bears at their own game, but the Bears are really good at that game.
Yep, DVOA shows the same thing. Chicago's 1, Minnesota's 4, but the difference between them is about the difference between Minnesota and the team that's about 20th. So it's absolutely right. Chicago's defense is just on another level from other defenses this year. Flip it around to when Chicago's on offense. I want to share with you this really kind of crazy stat that I found. The Minnesota defense is heavily susceptible to play action, right? They allow only 5.7 yards per pass versus regular passes, but 7.8 against play action. The problem is Chicago is the worst play action team in the league. They only gain 5.7 yards per pass on play action compared to 7.2 otherwise, right? Most teams gain more yardage per play on play action. That's the biggest negative gap in the league that the Chicago offense has.
That's fascinating. I wonder what it is that's playing into that. I don't know if maybe Trubisky is just not a big turning the back on a defense fan. He'd rather keep it all in front of him facing that way. That's a really surprising statistic.
It's surprising, especially because it's a similar scheme to Kansas City with a lot of the misdirection and stuff, and that should have linebackers constantly jumping at things and moving out of the way for play-action passes. And yes, Chicago is terrible at play-action passes.
All right. Super interesting. All right. Well, those are the big games that we wanted to break down. I'm definitely looking forward to Week 17. It's going to be basically the first week of the playoffs with the way things are shaking out. I would love to see if St. Nick could find a way and we could get Mike T back on the show next week. Any holiday reading that you want to recommend? Anything before we sign off?
We'll have a piece up on Football Outsiders this week about the Colts defense. We'll have the big bowl update with the previews going all the way through the semifinals of the college football playoff. And I also should remind everybody that all of the charting stats that I quoted on this broadcast here, all of the stuff, the charting numbers for quarterbacks, the stuff about broken tackles, the stuff about pressure rate, that's all available in the Sports Info Solutions charting product that we sell at Football Outsiders. It's $40 to get all the numbers from the 2018 season. You get it for 1 year, so if you subscribe now, you'll get it all through the 2019 regular season. And you should check that out at footballoutsiders.com/store.
Yeah, sneaky good deal here from Aaron. If you're planning on buying it right before the season started next year, just buy it now and you'll have it through the fantasy football playoffs. Let's sign off, and when we talk next time, we will be breaking down the playoff matchups in the wild card round. Have a great weekend and enjoy some football.